Hello, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Marcel.
We're here today at PhotoCare Rentals to give you a quick start guide to the Fujifilm GFX100 version 2. This guide should give you a good place to pick up to make excellent photos
and incredible video. This camera has two modes, movie and still. Aaron's going to be walking us through the still section of it.
When the camera is in the still operation mode, it works just like any other still camera. At the top it has its control dial where you have manual, aperture, shutter, and program modes, as well as 6 custom function ones, which save your settings as you go through. On the other side of the camera, on these wheels, you've got control for shutter speed and ISO, and on the lenses you can control the aperture. You could also set the lenses to C, which gives control to the camera, and simply by pressing in the button on the side of the camera, you can toggle between control modes. Once you turn the camera on, the first thing you should do is check in the menus, and by hitting the menu button on the back, you'll immediately see you're in the IQ menu. That's image quality. In there, you can set it to be RAW or JPEG. This is the most important thing, as if you need to shoot RAW pictures, you have to set it now. You can't get it back later. Underneath that, there's also the film simulations. Fujifilm has built in several different film simulations so that you can use all their color science to your advantage. In the RAW files, they're all included, so when you're editing in a different application, you can still pull upon them if you choose. Every setting underneath that image quality only affects your JPEGs or the previews you get from the camera, which can be cool, but if you're shooting RAW, they will be saved, but not baked into the image, so you can still recover everything afterwards. On the third page of the image quality menu is where the color space options are, and it's important to decide whether you'd like to shoot in sRGB or Adobe RGB.
Why is that important?
Well, typically sRGB offers less color in the RAW file. Adobe RGB allows you to have more colors saved in the RAW file, so if you're making prints or really diving into the file, it gives you more options. The other important thing to note is that this is a mirrorless camera, which means that you have to be very careful of the screen settings. Because you're not actually seeing through the lens, you have to decide, do you want an exposure simulation? That is to say, the camera is going to show you what your image will probably look like, or do you not want that? Do you just want to see through the lens? For studio applications or for creative applications, it's nice to just look through the lens and not worry about looking into a dark room. But if you're photographing in natural light, you may not notice that your settings are way underdone. You can do this by going into the setup menu to screen setup and going to the second page where it says preview exposure/white balance. You can turn it to turn exposure preview on or off. Now that we've covered the basic menu items, let's talk about the camera buttons. In the very top left corner, you'll see the drive button, and this gives you the functionality to shoot single images at high speed continuous, which is 8 frames per second, to bracket your ISO, white balance, or other options. It's all located there. Also on the back of the camera is the auto exposure lock button, the AEL button. This way, when you're metering off the focus point, you can press that button and the meter won't stop working and maintain that exposure. That way you can recompose while keeping the same exposure. On the top of the camera, there's the AF on button. This allows you to back button focus, so if for some reason you don't want to use the half press of the shutter button to focus, you can use that as well. This allows you to focus on a subject and recompose. Next to that button is the focus switch. Most commonly, this is where people lose track, and they're wondering, why won't my camera focus? That's because Fuji has it set up right here to go for single, continuous, or manual focusing with one handy switch. You can also change this in the menu, but the quickest way to change it is physically on the camera. Another great thing about this camera is that every button is programmable. If you'd like to change that, you can go to the setup menu and choose button and dial settings. There, you can give each button your chosen settings. Some other important things to know about the camera is how to turn the hot shoe on and off. By going to the flash menu, going over to flash function setting, and then using the back wheel, you can turn the hot shoe or sync terminal on and off. When using a Fuji flash, you can also turn TTL on and off. When metering with this camera, it's important to choose between multi, center weighted, spot, or average, which is located in the shooting settings menu with the camera icon on the second page. Now that we've discussed diving into the menu, there's an easier way to access these things through the quick menu. To the right of the camera, there's a Q button, which gives you the option to change any of these settings just on the back of the camera. The camera does have a touchscreen, but you can also use the lever to go through it. You can customize what's in there, but what's immediately available are your shooting mode, your ISO, your dynamic range, etc. Everything you could want to change is available at the press of a button. To adjust your autofocus settings, you can go to the autofocus menu. For autofocus modes, you can choose between single point, zone, wide tracking, and all. Additionally, this camera also has face detect, but note that while you're using face detect, you don't have control over your metering. If you decide to manual focus, the camera also has assists for you. So if you go to the second page of the autofocus manual focus menu, Under Manual Focus Assist, you can choose how you'd like it to help you, including things like a digital prism, focus peaking, etc.
What's peaking?
Oh, peaking is when the camera will show you what it thinks will be in focus based on the contrast and where the lens is set to. So, if you're pointing at a subject and you're adjusting your focus, the area of critical focus, for example, the eye, might be highlighted some color to indicate that that is the portion of the image which is acceptably sharp. If you're renting this camera or borrowing it or going to a different situation, it might be useful to reset it. You can do that by going to the Setup menu, going to User Settings, and finding the second to last item, Reset. This will allow you to reset the camera so that any other modes or things you might have been using will be gone and it will go back to its default. Note that this does mean you have to switch back from JPEG to RAW, switch your color space, your metering, and so forth. Another great advantage of this camera is it has camera to cloud built into it, and all the functions are right there in the menu. Now that we've covered the still capabilities of the GFX100 version 2, let's talk about the movie mode.
Once you switch the camera over to movie mode, there's a whole new menu that's specific to this function. The first thing you'll want to set up on your camera is your frame rate and resolution. You'll find the resolution and frame rate in the movie setting list, which is the first column in the movie setting page. The highest resolution on this camera is 8K DCI at 24 frames per second. Once you switch the camera to 4K, it'll allow you to shoot up to 60 frames per second. Remember this simple rule when setting your shutter speed. Make your shutter speed double your frame rate. For example, if you're shooting 24 frames per second, you can change your shutter speed to 1/48th or 1/50th of a second. The max bitrate on this camera is 10-bit 422. If you want to shoot in the highest resolution possible, you'll have to use a CF Express card. This camera has one CF Express Type B slot and one normal SD card slot. To access your log settings, you'll want to go to the second page of the movie setting menu. This camera has F-Log and F-Log 2.
What's F-Log?
Thanks for asking, Aaron. F-Log is Fujifilm's version of a log profile. Let's go over a few ports on the left side of the camera. Starting at the bottom of the camera with USB-C, which will allow you to power your camera. Right above that is full HDMI, which will allow you to connect to a monitor. Right above that, we have a 3.5mm mic input. On the top of the camera, there's an Ethernet port, which allows you to send proxy files or upload 4K ProRes video via Frame.io. You can also do this with the built-in Wi-Fi this camera has. You can also use timecode with this camera if you're using the Atomos AirGlue BT. Fuji supplies us with a bunch of film simulations we can apply in camera.
Which simulation do you recommend?
Well, I would recommend Reala Ace, which is a new simulation that Fuji released with this camera. So that just about wraps it up for the video side of things.
Thank you for watching. We hope you found this quick start guide helpful. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Marcel.
And we'll see you next time.